Have you ever wondered what happens when Gotham's most incorruptible defender of the law looks in the mirror and sees only fragments? What if the line between right and wrong, order and chaos, became so thin that only the flip of a coin could decide fate? Prepare to delve into the mind of a man who, from a symbol of hope, transformed into a force of nature, driven by a distorted ideal of balance. What you are about to see will challenge your understanding of justice and the fragility of the human mind. Before the scar that split his face and soul, Harvey Dent was the embodiment of righteousness in Gotham. As district attorney, his reputation was impeccable, a beacon of integrity in a city plunged into the darkness of corruption. He fervently believed in the legal system, in justice's ability to prevail, no matter the obstacles. For Dent, the law was a shield for the innocent and a sword against criminals, and he wielded it with an almost religious conviction. His worldview was dichotomous. There was good and evil, and he was dedicated to making good prevail. Psychologically, Harvey Dent displayed traits of a highly rigid and perfectionist personality, characteristics that drove him to seek order and exactness in everything he did. This relentless pursuit of perfection made him a formidable opponent to crime, but it also left him vulnerable to any imperfection or failure, especially those that challenged his sense of justice. Gotham City, in turn, was the perfect stage to test the limits of this conviction, an environment where the line between heroism and tragedy was constantly blurred. Systemic corruption and incessant violence were a daily challenge to Dent's unwavering faith in the system. He was the optimist, the dreamer who believed in Gotham's redemption. But there was something no one saw coming, a force that would crush that faith. The turning point in Harvey Dent's life was brutal and undeniable, a disfiguring chemical attack that struck half his face. This event was not just a devastating physical assault. It was a profound trauma that struck at the core of his identity, his perception of the world, and his very essence. Imagine losing, in an instant, the image you had of yourself, confidence in your appearance, and, more importantly, faith in the system and institutions you strive so hard to protect and that failed to protect you. The physical pain was excruciating, but the emotional wound was even more corrosive, penetrating deeply into his psyche. He didn't just see his deformed face in the mirror. He saw the failure of everything he believed in, a reflection of the chaos that to him had triumphed over order and justice. The beauty and integrity he valued were destroyed by an act of pure cruelty. From that moment on, Harvey's transformation began to unfold irreversibly and terrifyingly. The respected and admired district attorney, Gotham's White Knight, gave way to a tormented figure who saw his own distorted reflection as a visceral symbol of the failure of the system he so ardently defended. The internal conflict was palpable, a deafening battle between who he was and the monster he was becoming. The desire for justice still existed, but it was now tainted by a burning desire for retribution, for revenge against a world he felt had betrayed him. Anger, frustration, despair, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness accumulated, eroding his psyche and the logic that once guided him. His mind, once a bastion of reason and law, began to build new connections, new justifications for the violence that had been inflicted upon him and that he now planned to inflict upon others. From a psychological perspective, we can analyze this transformation through the lens of post-traumatic stress disorder, which manifests in nightmares, flashbacks, irritability, and increased reactivity to stimuli, compounded by a possible psychotic reaction to disfigurement and loss of control. His disfigurement is not just physical damage, but the externalization of his internal rupture. The shock and pain were so intense that his mind sought a way to deal with the cognitive dissonance between his deeply held belief in order and the chaotic brutality that befell him. Two-Face emerges, then, as a distorted defense mechanism, an outlet for unbearable pain and contained rage. The randomness of the coin becomes the only way to re-establish balance in a world he now perceives as intrinsically unbalanced, unjust, and unpredictable. It's as if he's saying, if the world is chaotic, then I will be the chaos that balances it. His duality is not just physical. It is a fragmentation of identity, where one part, however residual, seeks order, and the other craves cruel, random justice, governed by chance. And it was there that everything began to crumble irreversibly and definitively, giving rise to one of Gotham's most complex and disturbing minds. With the rise of Two-Face, the mind once focused on legalistic order and the predictability of law now molded itself into a new and disturbing logic, that of forced equilibrium through absolute randomness. His disfigured face was not just a visible scar. It was the physical and constant representation of his new philosophy of life. He no longer saw nuances, shades of gray, or margins of error. The world was a binary game of black and white, heads or tails, order or chaos, fate or doom. This distorted mind sought to apply a cruel and implacable justice, where blind luck, not morality, ethics, or law, decided the fate of individuals. Two-Face's actions become a series of macabre social experiments, testing the limits of unpredictability and human nature under extreme pressure. He revels in forcing people to confront the same arbitrariness that consumed him, as if he wants to share his new and dark truth with the world. From a psychological viewpoint, we can understand this evolution through the concept of distorted cognition and pathological rationalization. Two-Face developed a rigid, inflexible, and deeply irrational belief system, where the coin is not just an instrument of decision, but an omnipotent and unquestionable symbol of his worldview. He rationalizes his acts of violence, intimidation, and destruction as a way of imposing the undeniable truth that the universe is fundamentally unpredictable and cruel. Each coin flip is for him a confirmation of his new reality, where arbitrariness is the only true law and the only form of balance. His speech is permeated by dualisms, phrases like two sides of the same coin, good and evil intertwine. Everything has an opposite, are not mere expressions, but mantras that reinforce his new philosophy. He believes he is merely exposing the true nature of existence, forcing others to confront the randomness he experienced firsthand, almost like an evangelist of a cult of chance. His sanity, for him, lies in accepting chance as the only ruler, and his mission becomes to impose this truth on others, no matter the consequences, no matter the lives he destroys in the process. He sees himself as the final judge, whose sentences are unquestionable because they come from the impartiality of luck, a fate even he cannot control, but which he can instrumentalize. But the true monster was still dormant, waiting for the opportunity to reveal its darkest and most irreversible face. The act of transgression that marks the point of no return for Harvey Dent and the complete, irrevocable, and relentless birth of Two-Face is his complete and undeniable surrender to the coin. It's no longer an occasional resource for trivial decisions, nor even an sporadic tool of coercion. The coin becomes his god, his moral compass, a compulsive obsession that dictates every step of his existence, every breath, every thought. He becomes a slave to randomness, allowing the flip of a coin to decide lives, determine the guilt or innocence of his victims, and trace his entire course of action, from the simplest theft to the most brutal and shocking acts of violence. Morality, ethics, and even the rational logic that once defined him and made him a respectable man are thrown to the wind in favor of an arbitrary and implacable system. He doesn't just commit terrible acts. He justifies them with chilling coldness and a perversely logical rhetoric, as if he were executing a higher natural law, a kind of justice of luck that transcends human laws. His worldview becomes deeply cynical, nihilistic, and grim. He believes that justice, as we know it, is a childish illusion for weak minds, that people are inherently selfish, manipulative, and that the only truth is the relentless randomness of fate. For Two-Face, chaos is not a flaw, but the only true constant and he sees himself as the herald, the prophet of this uncomfortable truth. He forces others into his psychological games of life or figurative death or literal without hesitation, turning his victims into mere pawns in his grand, cruel philosophical experiment on human nature under pressure. He questions the very idea of free will, suggesting that everyone is, in some way, controlled by forces beyond their control, just as he was manipulated by fate. This is the essence of his cognitive distortion. If his life was determined by a random and unjust event, then everyone's lives should be governed by the same uncertainty and unpredictability. He sees the world as a reflection of his own disfigured condition. This leads us to a disturbing dilemma. What if, in his apparent madness, Two-Face is exposing an uncomfortable truth about the fragility of order, the illusion of control, and the undeniable force of chance in our lives? Where does insanity end and a new, albeit terrifying, form of logic begin that many refuse to see? A logic that, in its brutality, perhaps reveals something about the universe we prefer to ignore. Two-Face's mind, however chaotic and irrational it may seem at first glance, operates under its own distorted and implacable logic, which can be methodically dissected by psychology. This logic can be deeply explored from the perspective of cognitive dissonance theory. After the overwhelming trauma that disfigured him, Harvey Dent found himself at an unbearable mental crossroads. How to reconcile his fervent belief in a just and orderly world with the brutal, unjust, and random reality he experienced firsthand. The solution to this intense mental and emotional tension was the creation of a new, rigid belief system where the randomness of the coin became the supreme judge, the final arbiter of all things, a mechanism to alleviate his anguish. This mechanism allowed him to resolve the dissonance, eliminating the need to deal with moral complexities, perceived injustices, and the inherent arbitrariness of life. If everything is decided by luck, then personal responsibility is diluted, and he becomes merely an instrument of chance, an impartial executor of a blind fate, purified of any guilt. We can even draw parallels with game theory and the psychology of control in situations of extreme stress. Two-Face doesn't just play with people's lives. He plays with their minds, with their deepest hopes and fears. He creates scenarios where choices are binary and consequences are extreme, forcing his victims to confront the same arbitrariness that consumed him and, in a way, converting them to his worldview by showing them the face of uncertainty. He uses the coin as an instrument of power and control, manipulating his victims' expectations, fear, and hope. By invoking luck as a greater power, he absolves himself of moral blame, attributing outcomes to a larger, impersonal force, thus becoming, in his own mind, morally untouchable. To some extent, he personifies the concept of existential fatalism, believing that events are predetermined by chance and that he is merely an instrument of this implacable fate, a priest of the unpredictable who exposes the weaknesses of order. Compared to other villains in the comic book universe, Two-Face stands out for his rigorous adherence to a code, even if that code is built on the purest and cruelest randomness. He is not driven by an unrestrained lust for power, by pure hedonism, or by meaningless cruelty. He acts driven by a compulsive need to impose his distorted version of balance on the world, a justice that is, in fact, a manifestation of his own broken mind. His actions are a calculated performance, a visceral demonstration of the truth he believes he has discovered, that life is a game of dice and justice, a mere illusion for the naive. His behaviors can be analyzed as a form of ritualistic compulsion, where the ritual of the coin flip calms his tormented mind, giving him a sense of control in a world he perceives as uncontrollable, validating his new and disturbing reality. He is not insane in the traditional sense, but his logic is so self-contained that it makes him unreachable by common reason. It wasn't meaningless madness. It was cold calculation, a logic of its own, disturbingly consistent and dangerous. The trail left by Two-Face is more than a series of crimes and violence. It's an indelible stain on Gotham's psyche and a profound questioning of the very nature of justice and morality in the city. How can the law prevail and faith be maintained when one of its greatest offenders turns against it, using his own ideals as a weapon and randomness as his supreme judge? Two-Face forces the city to confront the idea that evil can arise from where it's least expected, and that the line between sanity and obsession can be dangerously thin, almost imperceptible in a collapsing world. His legacy is a collective scar, a constant reminder of the fragility of order and the thin veneer that separates us from chaos, a warning that stability is an illusion. His existence serves as a grim reminder that trauma can fragment the human mind in unpredictable and devastating ways, leading to the construction of new realities, however disturbing they may be. The philosophical question Two-Face poses to us is complex and uncomfortable. Who are we to judge the sanity of someone who has been pushed to the limits of their existence, confronted with the loss of their identity, their appearance, and their deepest faith in what was right? His actions, though undeniably terrible and destructive, can be seen as a desperate cry from a mind that tried to impose order, even if a distorted order, on a universe that, for him, became inherently chaotic and unjust. He became the manifestation of his own suffering, a force of nature that seeks to mirror the pain he felt. The myth of Two-Face endures because he represents the primordial and universal fear that, under the right circumstances, a profound trauma, an irreparable loss, a betrayal by the system one blindly believed in any of us could lose control and succumb to our own distorted version of reality. He embodies the duality that exists within all of us, the capacity for good and evil, for order and chaos, for rationality and obsession. His story is a powerful warning about the dangers of blind faith, the consequences of a broken mind seeking refuge in perverted logic, and the ease with which justice can bend to vengeance. He is not just a villain to be fought, but a philosophical challenge. But perhaps he was not the last to question the true face of justice and challenge notions of fate and control. The seed of doubt he planted continues to germinate in Gotham's shadows, and who knows, in other tormented minds that still believe in controlling destiny. The story of Two-Face confronts us with an unsettling truth. Justice, order, and even identity itself can be fragile, capable of breaking under the weight of the deepest trauma. He is not just a villain, but a dark mirror reflecting the cracks in the foundation of our own understanding of good and evil. Two-Face's coin continues to spin in our minds, reminding us that, sometimes, the fate of everything might truly rest on the luck of a flip. And what if, in the end, the true face of chaos is the face of randomness that we all fear in our lives, and that he simply had the courage to accept?